So back then, people used to raid, they'd bury the pharaohs, and everybody knew that all the pharaoh's wealth went into his tomb with him. And they had tomb raiders, and the tomb raiders, the robbers, would go and get all the wealthy stuff out of the tombs, because they'd know where the pharaohs had been buried. But Tutankhamun was quite an obscure king. He died quite young. Nobody knew where his tomb was. And so all of the stuff that was in his tomb stayed there until it was discovered a little less than 100 years ago. And so it is the greatest collection of beautiful stuff that the world has ever seen from Egypt. And about 7 years ago, the Egyptian government made a decision which they make very rarely. It's only happened twice in history, where they took all Tutankhamun stuff and they packaged it up and they allowed it to travel around the world. And one of the places it went to was Chicago. And our business partners have a very big office in Chicago. And so what our business partners did was they bought the museum. They just said they closed it down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They closed it down, and only people from our office were allowed to go. And they asked me to come and speak to all of them and their clients about Egypt, because I'm supposed to know a lot about Egypt, and I'm supposed to know a lot about marketing. That's what we do. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about the things that I talked to those very clever grown-up people 7 years ago. And one of the things you'll learn is that they're not much cleverer than you. So you'll understand what I'm going to say. I thought I'd begin with a question. And the question is, who do you think were the wealthiest people in Egypt? Lots of hands. Why don't you just shout? Not the pharaoh. That's a cheap answer. That's the obvious answer. The king's obviously wealthier than everybody else. After the pharaoh, who's wealthiest? Yes. That?
His family and friends.
Family and friends. Oh, that's also cheating.
Rent.
Yes.
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors. Not bad. That? I can't hear you now. I'm obviously getting too old. Speak up.
Can't hear.
Sorry, what's that young girl saying? Cleopatra. She was a pharaohess, so that's also cheating. She was a queen. Nice try. Yeah. Government. People in government. Not bad, but that's too general. There are all sorts of people in government. They're like teachers in government. Are they wealthy? No, that sounds perfect. One more. The robbers. That's a very clever answer. But it's not right either, because the problem with... Okay, I'll take one more. The problem with the robbers is that they couldn't show their wealth, because then everybody would know that they'd stolen everything. That's one of the big problems, by the way, if you're a robber. You have to get rid of it really quickly. I'm just warning you. Yes? Advisors, not bad. The priests were the advisors. Okay, that's enough, because it's already 5 past. See, so we have to move on. We'll find out who the wealthiest people were. This is Herodotus. You may not have heard of him. He was a Greek historian and traveler, and he's writing 250 BC. That means he was writing this more than 2,400 years ago. It's a long time. And he traveled around the world. And this is what he said about Egypt. And I think it's worth starting here, because one of the things you're going to learn is they weren't very different from us. It might seem as if they were very different. They weren't very different from us. And this is what he said about Egypt. Concerning Egypt itself, now it's very old-fashioned language. I'll read it and then I'll paraphrase it for you. I shall extend my remarks to great length. In other words, he said, when it comes to Egypt, I'm going to write a lot. I'm going to say a lot. Because there is no country that possesses so many wonders, nor any that has such a number of works which defy description. Egypt was the most incredible country in the world at that time. Now this is 350 BC. By this time, Egypt was already declining. It was already over. For those of you who know Egypt, you have to go back 4,500 years to when Egypt was at its height. By 350 BC, it was already a declining empire. What country country is the most like Egypt today? If you were to write a, yes.
I'd say Chicago.
Sorry, I can't.
Chicago.
Chicago.
South
Chicago
Africa.
is a city in the United States, and the United
South
States is like
Africa.
Egypt. Sorry, that's the end of the, you got it right first time. What were you going to say? What?
Italy.
Italy, no. Sorry. No more. We don't have too much time for questions. But I'm very pleased to see how enthusiastic you are about answering questions. If we were to identify the country that comes closest to Egypt today, it would be the United States. The United States is where everybody wants to go. Confucius a long time said, if you want to know which countries are well governed, have a look at the countries that people want to go to. And it is the United States that is the world's wealthiest country. The United States only has 6% of the people in the world. It has 25% of the world's wealth. So think United States, the most powerful country in the world, the only country that has sent people to the moon and all that sort of things. That was Egypt. It was like the United States. And by that time, it was already over. It was already not going to be great for very much longer. So we're talking here about a country that really amazed people even back then. Even back then. Do you know what graffiti is? Yes, okay. Where will you find the oldest graffiti in the world? I'll answer the question for you. You see, human beings are not different. Even back then, now we're talking 3,600 years ago, people were tourists. And everybody wanted to visit Egypt because it was the most incredible country in the world. And even back then, as tourists, they carved their names into the buildings. And so you'll find the oldest graffiti in the world on the Sphinx in Egypt, if you look carefully. They didn't get caught, I don't think. And these buildings are the earliest, the Great Pyramids of Giza, which is still one of the wonders of the world, were built 4,700 years ago. It's unbelievable that human beings were able to do this so long ago. So go back all the way to Jesus, go back to Muhammad, and multiply by 4. Go back to Jesus and multiply by 2. That's how long ago this was, and that's how great this country was. What were they like as people? If they were similar to us, what were they like? So here is an important surprise. They were racist. They believed they were the best people in the world, bar none. Nobody else was any good. And they looked around, and as far as they were concerned, it was obvious that they were the best people in the world because they were the wealthiest, the cleverest. There was nobody else who could compete with them. The north of Egypt, people were quite fair-skinned because they lived close to the Mediterranean. Egypt was a very, very large country. It was an empire. By the time you get to the south of Egypt, you start to get black people. Why? Because black people you need a black skin to be protected from the sun. If you go to Norway, you get people who are very white. Why? Because they don't get enough sunlight. You should feel sorry for them. And they need white skins to make vitamin D so that they can survive. The further south you go, the blacker people get because they need protection from the sun. And the Egyptians were racist. It was easy for us to tell because we've got their writing. The further south they went, the less they liked the people. When they left the country and went anywhere else, that's very bad manners, by the way.
Sorry.
That's the woman who married.
Sorry, I
When
can't
they
talk
left
now.
the country and went anywhere
Bye.
else,
I can't talk now.
they only had bad things to say about people. They were racist. This tells you, by the way, how big a problem racism is. And I can see here that none of you are racist, and this is very important. Here's a second thing you'll learn about them. They were very corrupt. They were forever paying backhanders to people so that they could get closer to the pharaoh and make money and so on. They were not very different from us. The pharaohs lived in a cyber world. You know, we think that, what do I mean by a cyber world? The pharaohs were very remote. They were very isolated. They didn't travel that much. So the only way they knew what was happening in the world was the messages they got. So it wasn't very different from us. We sit in front of a computer and we do Facebook and so on. They were the same, except they had human beings running to them with messages. This is the floor plan of the house of a wealthy person. In other words, if so we're looking at this person's house from above. Okay? You can see where the front door is, right there at the bottom. This is what their house was like. And this is a wealthy person. Now I want you to, start using your brains and think about what this tells you. Because you'll learn again some very interesting things about Egypt and the Egyptians. Let's have a look. So there's the house, big enough so that you can see it. And you can see their passages and rooms and so on. And we picked out a couple of rooms. And one of the things you should notice is that the door's really small. Why would they have really small doors? I'll tell you why. Okay, yeah, I'm sure you're getting it right. I can't stop to have you answer questions. Because it was a dangerous place to live. And this big door made it easy for people to get in the door. So one of the ways that they protected themselves was by having very small doors. They also, by the way, had very few windows. Because they didn't have glass. Okay? So a window is like just an opening in your house. Why would you have a window with an opening in your house? People could climb through. So they didn't have windows. But the most interesting thing about this house is you go in, and immediately you're not sure which direction you should go. Should you go to the right or the left? And you know what happens if you go to the left? You don't know. You can see, you see, so you're in a lucky position. You can see. But you know what happens if you go to the left? You find nothing. They had nothing there. It was a trick. It was to make sure that if anybody did get into the door, the robbers would get lost. That's what they were doing. So here's the interesting thing. They had a crime problem, just like we do. Nothing is new. This is 4,500 years ago. The granary, number 3 was the granary. That's where they kept food. Notice how far away the granary is from the front door. Because food was the most precious thing, apart from art and stuff like that. So they put the food far away from the front door. You see all of these rooms off the passage. So you've got the long, long passage. All of the rooms off the passage. That's where the bodyguards of the wealthy person lived. This tells you how serious crime was. So a small door, the robber comes in, doesn't know which way to go, goes left, gets lost. Bodyguards hear the noise, come out, kill the robber. Simple. Now, imagine this robber is lucky. So the robber goes in, turns to the right, goes down, bodyguards come out and kill the robber. That's how they handle it. So the food is right at the back so that nobody can see that you have to go. And number 2 there, that's where the mother and father slept. That's the main bedroom. And it took forever for you to find the main bedroom if you went into the house of a wealthy person. But like all societies, not everybody was wealthy. So how do we figure out how wealthy people were? The way we do that is we have a look at how big the houses were. So we've got, the villages. And we can see the different houses with their doors and so on. And this is a graph that people like I use in my work. What we've got on the horizontal axis is the size of a house. So at the bottom end, we've got the very small